part of the spark work is about radical honesty and kind of coming back to even more integrity with like what's actually a yes for you and what you've kind of been trying to convince yourself is a yes for you.
Hello, Heartmind fans. I am so happy to be with you and friends of me and Liz. And I am incredibly grateful to have Liz Kimball with me here on this podcast. Liz is a dear, dear old friend. We've known each other for over a decade now, which is hard to believe. And we met each other. Oh gosh, it was 16 and a half years ago, starting our grad programs. And I've engaged in Liz's work. I've admired her work. And I believe, Liz, you're doing incredible lifting for our collective on empowerment, creativity. And today's theme is spark. So excited to talk to you.
What
Um,
a blessing it is to be here with you. I'm so excited.
yeah, thank you for taking the time. So, I always start with the person's journey with this theme. And I just would love to hear, I know some of it, but here again, um, and I've heard it through your different talks and things, your journey through spark, finding it, losing it, reclaiming it. Can you tell me a little bit about your creative journey?
Yeah, I love that. Because like we all kind of have a relationship with our creative spark over our lifetime. Or so I love that question. I think like so I always like to think about what did you love when you were a kid? Not necessarily like, what you wanted to be when you grew up, like is just kind of one question adults ask you, but like also just like what you loved to play when you were a kid. And I'm so curious about how you would answer that. But I there were like several things I really loved to play as a kid. So I think that's sort of like the birthplace of the spark. And one of them was like I love to kind of like lead groups. Like I really like I had dolls and I would like lead dolls in classes. And it was sort of like a school theme, but it was like it's just amazing. Like it was like I've been leading groups of women since I was 3. Like there were just always, kind of a circle of dolls around me, and I was like guiding them in something. And I love to dance. I love to dance even before. So I'm a trained dancer. Danced ballet for 20 years, and then dance was part of my early career as an artist. But before I had any training, I loved to dance. And then I loved to pretend that I was a businesswoman. I had an alter ego, and her name was Sally Kimball. This was like the late 80s. So I was like, I think I had those like images in my head of like shoulder pads and like red lipstick, and I had this fake phone, a fake rotary phone, and I had a desk. And Sally Kimball just like made business deals during the day. And I think that all of those, that's like how I would talk about Spark from, kind of the earliest memories that I have. And it's all really positive. When I think about doing those things, I feel really good.
Yeah. And it has a sense, just a lot of my work is elemental, but it has a sense of like a fire to it. Like there's something that's like fueling you as a kid to kind of really dive deep into that imagination. I used to, it's funny, you're just now making me think about, I used to have a bag of, I called them my people. And they were like little figurines that you would collect like at the McDonald's, like in the Happy Meals, and all those different ones that you would get. And they're all kind of little people. And then what I would do is I would put them in a line. I would make this like so that if I don't know, it's like circled through the whole room, made different shapes. And I would walk each one further down the line. And as they were walking, they'd have conversations with each other and stuff. But now realizing what you're talking about is like I was ushering people through like progression.
Yes. Oh my God. And what do you remember feeling like when you played like that? Do you remember what do you remember?
It was like there was an element of me that had to do it because I was an only child too. You were an only child, right?
Yes.
There was an element that I had to do it, but then it was like I was very curious in the witnessing of like how these two people would interact too. Like there was a curiosity there of their relationships and how those relationships might shift because the princess now is next to the big dog or something. How will they interact?
Oh, so you had that, you kind of had that sense, that like seeing of the connections between people.
Yeah.
I love the fire thing too, because so you asked about reclaiming, and like I would say at the center of my purpose and my work is about helping us reclaim a relationship with our creativity that I think we're all meant to have. And your spark is kind of where we begin with that. And so those parts of me that I just talked about, I think really then became super dormant in all kinds of ways, like happens to so many of us. And it really is
Mm.
isn't until the birth of my own kids that I've started to, I think, kind of reclaim some of that fire, and just some of the energy of how I used to play in that way. And that's so much of, that's what I do in my work is like, and why I begin every coaching process with somebody with this question, because it's not like a icebreaker, it's really like we want to look at how you played and how you felt when you played. And what we need to kind of what energy we want to kind of bring back into your life now.
Hmm. Yeah, when I think about your work with creativity and this idea of spark, I've always thought about fire for you, like how you're kindling that for yourself, but also for women that I know you work with and for the community, the collective. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and I
so,
don't think I would say I had a lot of fire for about 3 decades. I mean, I think it's always been in me, but I think it the reason I like to think about like little me at a desk make like such a badass. You know what I mean? Like whatever that was in me is because that is part of me too, but I feel like I sort of forgot it for a long time.
do you feel like that was true when you were studying acting at UT?
So I think that I was able to, through kind of like acting and artistic expression, access my spark more easily than in my life. So I think that like UT was a big turning point for me though. We're talking about, I got my MFA in acting, you got your MFA in playwriting. And for me, I think UT, oh, first of all, the context is like I went to get an MFA in acting, and I don't even know if you know this. Like, I didn't really want to, I knew in my heart I didn't want to be an actor for 20 years, but I
Oh.
knew that I had to go. Like, I just had this deep intuitive sense that I needed to study acting at its, in a deep craft, the deep craft of acting. And I knew I needed to go to grad school. And somehow I knew I needed to go to UT. Maybe it was also to meet you. But I always knew, like, I knew that I sort of like, I couldn't see 20 years into the future as a performer. Like, I knew that there was something else for me. But what I learned in grad school, which is the most invaluable thing I think I've learned in my adult life, is like how to be creatively free. And I think that so like that's kind of how this spark started to come back, I think, because I was a performer for 10 years. I was making my living as an artist and I was so creatively constrained. And grad
Mm.
school, a couple different, way, and I like highlight, the work I did with you and was a place where I felt really creatively free. And I just think that's the best thing I've ever learned to do.
Mm. Yeah, because it was interesting to hear you say, like, you just feel like now that you've gotten it back, because it just from the outside, just to share a little bit, because I remember still you being so kind and letting me stay with you for a night, maybe 2 nights in New York one time. And I remember seeing you at your desk like a boss. like really, in my mind, you've always had this spark. You've always had this like drive and creativity, and you were so connected to your creative process at the time you were like writing. I think you were just starting some of this business that you were doing with, women groups
Yeah.
and things like that. So yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that you feel like it's just now in the last few years.
I think maybe the way I'd talk about it is it's fine. I'm starting to feel like I'm integrating who people receive me as and what it feels like to be on the inside of me.
Mm,
So, um, yeah, that's how I'd talk about that.
yeah. And so any other thing around your own personal journey around reclaiming or finding that spark recently? Any kind of moments or things you'd want to share?
Well, yeah, so recently what I have found so interesting is like okay, so I'm jumping ahead maybe several decades. Um
If there's
and
more, you can go back if
no,
there's more.
I think it's like our journeys are both linear and nonlinear at the same time. Um, I have two kids. We have kids actually really similar ages. And after the birth of my second kid, Mila, I basically like everything started to unravel. And I thought I had postpartum anxiety and depression, which is so
Mm,
common. And I think anybody who has experience with that, I just want to keep talking about it and like talking about how normal it is and how many women go through it and still how much kind of shadow and like lack of we don't talk about it enough.
yeah.
And so, but I was really, really, really suffering, like
Mm,
big time after the birth of Mila. And I also had a 3-year-old and a husband who traveled. And it was just like I was, really in the depths of motherhood. And so I went to a therapist, thank goodness. I saw a therapist for what I thought was postpartum anxiety and depression. And she actually really kind of diagnosed it as complex PTSD from like early childhood. And
mm,
since then, part of why I was like not just suffering in motherhood at that time, but I was also like for the first time, Holly, I feel like in my life, for the first time, I felt totally creatively blocked. Like I couldn't write. I started to develop a performance anxiety around speaking and leading, which was very strange for me because I've been facilitating for over a decade. I've just kind of I have been in this kind of like speaking role for a long time. And right after Mila was born, I started to get so much anxiety that I started to like, I stopped doing podcasts. It was
mm,
so stressful for me that I just was like, I can't even do it. And I didn't know what to write. I stopped writing I kind of paused the newsletter. And so that was another thing that was just like going on. And so, and to talk about Spark, I was like, I didn't know what I was excited about, what I wanted to write about, what I wanted to say, what I wanted, and I like it's all embarrassing because you're like a creativity coach who helps people get creatively unblocked. And you're like, here you go. Like you're sitting in the middle of your own block. And it's
mm.
been a journey since then, um, to really start to like from the ground up, practice what I preach, kind of walk the walk of like, okay, I can't feel like where is my spark? Let's start with desire. Let's start with enthusiasm. Let's start with curiosity, like going back to these things that I've been talking about for years and kind of just have felt sort of easily accessible. And to be like, okay, you know, just see what's here now. And so over the last several years, I think I've really been trying to prioritize my own enthusiasm inside of this very strange journey where your whole life with kids, I feel is like organized around other people's enthusiasm. And I think
Mm.
it's just, I'm so interested in like the spark of moms because I think that, we're always kind of empowering situations for other people to really, for their imaginations to be lit up, but also like yours, moms, parents, it's really important too.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I literally just had a client yesterday I was working with that felt this postpartum anxiety, depression. Although I agree, like There's lots of things that it could potentially be, related to, but it's such a thing that, the journey of becoming mother in that first pregnancy, there's a lot that can come up because it's like, I got to get this out, before this happens. But then the journey afterwards is how much like grief and we lose, and it's recalibrating our identity. And I think that can leave us really alone. And I really appreciate you expressing what you found in that time and how you started to step up into your healing. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm so grateful that I got help
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah. And so, what were some, if you don't mind sharing, in as little as much as you would like, some of those key inner healings around, you know, I'm just going to name off some that I've heard, but maybe there's something even I'm not saying, but perfectionism, achievement, self-worth, those types of things maybe you found in that time that helped you kind of come back to the spark.
Yeah, okay, so I hired this therapist and I was hiring the therapist because I was just like, it felt, my husband and I kind of talked about it like if I had a broken arm and like if my arm had fallen off and it was a gaping wound and it was bleeding, we would take me to the hospital and it like took me so long to get therapeutic help. But like what was going on in my mind felt like the equivalent of an arm that had fallen off and you have this gaping wound and you're bleeding. And it just took a while for me to see that and see kind of how dire it was. So I kind of started in this really dire place. But even though the place was so dire, I remember the first day of therapy and my therapist said, like, so what's your intention for therapy? And I said to her, well, I really want to be an incredible example for my children. Like I said something about how like I want my children to know an incredibly strong woman. Something like that. And I was so proud of myself. I was like, look at me go. What a great answer. You know, it's like I was like, this is the right answer for therapy. And it's true. It wasn't untrue. And she just
Mhm.
paused and she's like, that, how she's just like, that's interesting that even your goal for your own healing has to do with somebody else, how somebody else will receive you, and that it's kind of an achievement to be strong for your kids. And I was like, what? Like it was just this beginning of sort of a certain worldview that I have held, which is like I'm only as good as my performance, essentially, whatever performance is. I don't mean like I'm happen to have a background as a performer, but I don't mean performing, but just like how whatever my worth is. I'm only as good as how I'm achieving and achieving strength in front of my kids or writing a great newsletter or coaching, my last great coaching session. And the journey of this, I think why like I was taken to this place and had to kind of go back and heal this PTSD had everything to do with valuing myself outside of anything I do, anything I create. And I think that that was like the next piece of really freeing my creativity, really being able to have access to more spark is taking all of the pressure off of it having anything to do with my worth. So I call this like unconditional mattering, but like that
Mhm.
my creative contributions and anything I do creatively has nothing to do with my goodness as a human being. And until that moment, until Mila was born, I think that was one of the things she kind of opened up in my life in this way was like starting to really, really learn it. I mean, I'd been coaching that, I'd been teaching other people that, but I still held myself, um,
Yeah, it's
like
a deep
not,
pattern.
yeah, I was like, yeah, but not me. Like, I still need to, like, you'll still only like me if this is really good. That's kind of the
Mhm.
essential thing.
One of the things you say in some of your work is, I'm curious about this because I think it's related to this like achievement, perfectionism, which I feel like a lot of us that are a little fiery kind of carry, and creative. You call this part of yourself that might be some people kind of call critic or things like the tiny terrorist. I've heard you say that in different. realms. Do you still call it that, or do you still use that phrase? I'm curious.
I do. And I also sometimes I call it the driver. So I've had two different words of it. I have found it really helpful to name it. I've
Hmm.
spent decades thinking about this, and I'd love to know how you approach it. I think it's so important to me to have like as open a conversation as anybody wants to have with me about this, just because I was a ballet dancer and I really, really suffered from terrible inner critic talk for multiple decades without talking to anybody about it.
Mm.
So, I think that it's so important to me in the creative process to just like acknowledge that this voice can come in. But I think something I've learned over the last several years is how affecting, how internalized patriarchy and systems of supremacy really affect the way you're talking to yourself inside of your head. But I always thought I have always felt terrorized by the voice. So I still use that for sure. But yeah, it's inner critic is another really kind of clear way people want to talk about it.
Well, I find that with your work is like that's one of the things I love about your work is that I can feel your creativity and how you approach things. Like even that felt like part of your creative process of labeling it. Um, I had wondered, yeah, if there was any evolution with it, because like you were saying with the patriarchy within our minds, like it also feels like I wondered like if it felt like a warring thing for you, because a terrorist is kind of wartime like language. Um, and it just made me think of that a little bit and labeling with creativity. And part of that spark, I feel like, is like, okay, what are these parts of myself and how can I creatively engage with them? Is something that I definitely do myself and work with people on.
I feel like I need to update it though, because I think you're so right on that we are trying to clear I think we collectively, kind of all of us working to build a more nonviolent world right now, in whatever way you are, to really kind of take out all of these places where systems of oppression, systems of violence have kind of come into our everyday life. So it makes me think like I should update it because I think you're right. Like it's
Or
what
evolve it.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, exactly.
it makes me think of like little Liz, and I had it too. I was an athlete.
Right.
And like I played collegiate basketball, and to get to that point, you have to
Yeah.
um, have that little terrace. I'll use the word for now, but it's like I think about terrorists, like they get to a point where that's the only way that they're gonna like survive or live in alignment or something like that. And that's how it feels, right? Like this is what I have to do. And so I'm going to push you or I'm going to violently make you do these things so that you survive or that you are, and it feels like that, even though we know, it's not that, but I have to be the best basketball player or I have to be the best ballerina um, in order to survive. But um, part of it is like, oh, kind of taking that little terrace and be like, here's another land, here's another kind of way we can go, um, is what I've had to do, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by all the ways as I've grown up that people are talking about it and working with it. And like, I mean, I love IFS, internal family systems work, and I love Richard Schwartz's kind of approach that like there are no bad parts. That's been really hard for me though, because I'm like, this part has really caused me a lot of stress in my life. And I also think I've had to kind of say, like, sometimes, and there's this Buddhist principle of like, take your fear to tea, like really sit with the parts that are the most shadowy. And I've totally done that. And sometimes it was something that's helped me also is that I don't always have to take that part to tea, especially as it relates to the creative process. And for me, sometimes the most important thing to do is to try to clear the room because I think what I learned is I can perform with that part, but I can't actually create my best, truest, freest work when we're under pressure in that way. And I think I thought for many years that that was how I got the best out of myself. And I'm
Yeah.
exploring a way where it's like, if benevolence is the water we're swimming in, can we still expand and achieve in ways that feel healthy and exciting? Is it can, can we still really do the things we want to do without any of that internalized pressure? Because I'm pretty clear at this point that like pressure does not work when it comes to anything creative.
Mm.
Some people would say yes. I just read something the other day that was like, you need pressure to create.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think you
There's
need
this whole
tension.
diamond, there's this whole diamond thing going around now, right? Like to create a diamond, you have to have pressure. Um, I see both the ends too. Yeah. What were you going to say? Did I cut you off?
I think you need tension. You need heat.
Mm. Yeah, I had one of my podcasts with Kirk, and his whole thing with play is around tension. And he has now this whole method and system. He has a class at UT that he teaches on play, and like there's four tensions you have to have in order to play. So,
Yeah, it's right. I think it's like, so I grew up with artist parents. Both of my parents were in music. And so I had such an opposite journey as so many performing artists and creators, whereas like I didn't have to advocate at all to be a ballet dancer. Like me becoming a ballet dancer was like the family business. I wasn't a musician, but I was like, it would have been so weird if I wasn't an artist. But what I didn't see, I saw people who kind of gave themselves permission to kind of use their creative voices in the world. But I didn't see artists and creatives who were in any way happy or in any way fulfilled or and I think in any way kind of just at peace with themselves. And I'm not blaming them. It's all the conditions of their lives that kind of didn't let them do that. But I think that I really started to become very curious about like, what's the intersection between creative excellence and inner peace and just kind of like, and really feeling safe and at home in yourself. And if we just create more and more feelings of safety and belonging and kind of benevolence inside of a creator, how's that going to affect their creative work? Because the way I was trained was like, you're not risking enough. You have to be unsafe to make great work. And I think I just keep testing this theory. And I'm just very interested in actually how, yeah, not using any kind of shameful, toxic, harmful force in the creative process actually makes hopefully what you feel is like your truest work.
mm. So thank you. And if more comes up from your story, please bring it up. I'm curious now, like how you would define spark. Like, what is it?
I think I would define it as your constellation of desire, enthusiasm, and curiosity. And so it also might have a feeling of like how you played when you were young. Like that might be a way we can kind of connect to it. But I also, anybody that I want to talk to about their spark, I want to be like, what do you want right now? And what lights you up and satisfies you right now? And what are you curious about right now? Because it's not like we're necessarily like those, I think we talk about who we were when we were little just to kind of remember the feeling, but it's usually we change. We're going to change our kind of what we're into and loving and curious about is going to change. But I think that to start to get curious about your spark, we want to be like, what do you really, really want? What do you really, really love? What's turning you on?
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah. So that's a great question. And so by asking those questions, then does the spark like ignite? Is that what you're seeing or feeling within yourself and with clients?
I'd say it's like, so I think I work with women and I do not believe we live in a culture that really in any way encourages female desire. So I
Mm.
think it's suppressed. And so whether or not you feel like some of us don't feel that way, but we're still swimming in the water, in a cultural water where like we are not taught to really respect and listen to our own desires. And I would also say enthusiasm and curiosity, like, it speaks to us in different ways. But I think that all of those things are actually kind of actively suppressed. So I don't usually feel like I ask somebody those questions. They're like, oh, I'm back. Like, here's I think it's this like gentle process of permission giving and awakening and little following little like breadcrumbs. And what I do as a coach is I'm just like, I just pay attention to like, where are you genuinely energized? Because the energy doesn't lie. So it's like I have a
Mm.
client right now and she just started taking ice skating lessons and we're working on her career. There's different things you work on, but it's like she just felt this like, we're really working on just her relationship with her creativity. And she was just like, I'm supposed to take ice skating lessons. And she's taking ice skating lessons and it's bringing her energy. And even if that doesn't make linear sense to her life or to her career, I want to follow that energy. I think spark shows up for us as energy in our adult lives.
Mm. Mm. So it's an activity maybe that you engage with that gives you back versus takes more from you.
Yes. Or maybe not an activity. Maybe it's like you start looking at some paintings, that are really inspiring to you. And it's just like, okay, I haven't given myself permission to just like indulge my love of beauty, and you start there. Like anything that legitimately turns you on, not like you feel like I'm supposed to like, or I'm supposed to be curious about, or I'm supposed to be, but that legitimately does is like a doorway. And we want to be like, yes, let's just follow that. Where is
Hmm.
that going to take us?
Hmm. And then the doorway leads to, I'm just curious with what you've seen or what you've felt.
Well, the doorway should lead to a feeling of more aliveness in your life on a daily basis. So I think like it's so hard to, calibrate or quantify or say like there's a metric to it. But what I want for all of us is more aliveness. I think that we're up against a lot. And I think that digital culture is a huge piece of this and kind of the productivity culture and the intersection of productivity culture and digital culture means that people might be creating all day long. People are creating content. They're doing, but do you actually feel good while you're doing it? And it can start to feel really extractive for people. So I think it's like that we go in the doorway and creativity starts to feel good.
Hmm.
And I have a client bringing a podcast into the world right now, and like just the whole thing lights her up. Like that's what I want for everybody. And then you have to take care of your kids and like unload the dishwasher and do the laundry and stuff. But in at least in certain areas of your life, you start to feel more alive.
Right. So, like the spark then is a way in which you're, like you had mentioned, you see the energy. It's like this lighting up from the inside, um, and able to kind of emanate that in your life.
I would say emanate it, but first and foremost, like it's for you. Like I
Yeah.
think it's like, yes, hopefully then it radiates outward in your communities. And like I have never seen a woman who doesn't kind of do the work to reclaim her relationship with her creativity that doesn't see positive results in her relationships because it's so often
Mhm.
we might be feeling burnt out, not always because of the kind of usual, which are all very legitimate around, all the stuff that we talk about with self-care and adrenals and all of it. But sometimes we're burnt out because we're sort of creatively disconnected and creatively underexpressed. And so I think it will absolutely radiate out and have an effect on your relationships. But first and foremost, it's like I start to feel more into stuff and more excited about stuff. And the result of kind of like whatever the little things you do, you start to look at some paintings, you start to listen to a playlist that turns you on, you start to write for 5 pages in the morning. My belief is that those little acts just start to say to your creativity, who I think of as kind of like a force, a force in your life, whatever you believe about creativity, this kind of force that we collaborate with, whether it's divinity to you. I don't worry about language because it's just whatever means something to people. But that force, that benevolent force is like, yes, I'm going to come visit you more. I trust you. Like it helps, creativity just say like, okay, I want to show up more for you. So usually there are more ideas and there are more kind of things you might want to see in your life, like insights and project ideas, and even kind of whole new chapters or parts of yourself. But I think it begins with just like little ways you show up for things that legitimately interest you and light you up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's you're sparking for me just like these little nuggets. And when you were talking about burnout, which I know so many of us kind of experience at times, but it's like that burnout of the spark within, like that it's just really dampened that. And it feels like, or it sounds like with your work, you're helping people reclaim it in a sustainable way.
Yeah, from a creative perspective, I think that the fire within you is going to be nourished by so many different things, and your work is going to do it in so many different ways. And then there's all kinds of biological things I think that we need to look at as well. But I just think the piece that I want to look at is like, did you do something today that inspired you? Like actually, and for many of us, we go weeks without being able to answer yes to that question. I know for the chapter of life I'm in, it's like I'm responsible to so many people, and my spark is like can be the last priority.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious what happens when we make it more of a priority.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, I have a couple more questions, and then I'm gonna move to the very end. Um, for someone that might not identify as like creative, for someone that might not identify as like an artist or in that realm that we've kind of been that we might identify with a little bit more, how would you start to interact with them or maybe orient them around some of this language or some of these types of activities? I'm just curious what your approach would be.
Well, Holly, I think that everyone is creative. And so I hear
I
you
do
that, I
too.
mean, like not everyone has um chooses an artistic path necessarily for their lives.
Or even like they hear the words, artist or creative, and they won't. How do you kind of? I agree with you. I agree. Like
Yeah.
it's inevitable. It's in our DNA. It's part of like the human
Yeah.
experience is being creative. But how do you start to help people kind of break down those walls a little bit?
Such a good question. Well, I would ask you the same questions about what you love and what turns you on and what you've been curious about recently in your life. What are you curious about legitimately? But I would also say, I can't convince anybody of anything. I'm not gonna be like, but I would just say, are you curious about your own creativity? Are you curious about this force in your life that if I talk to you, whoever I'm sitting with, about what you played with as a kid, kids aren't like I'm creative or not, they're just interacting with their own ideas and their own imagination and their own curiosity. And it's just fluid. And we
Mm,
were all born to be that way. So I would really also begin with like, tell me about a time when you really enjoyed creating or playing.
mhm,
And we start there, and then we figure out what got layered on top that cut you off from that. You didn't
mhm.
do anything. The culture cut you off from it. And we got to just kind of get back to like the part of you that knows how to play and that knows how to imagine and that is actually curious about, what happens when I make a move on an idea. We all have it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it feels like I know your work's like this too. You actually helped me with this at a time when I joined one of your programs. But the very thing that you were talking about, like the idea of play or what it constitutes as creative might be bigger than a lot of people think. Like gardening, for example, could be creative, or there's so many different ways that it could be expressed.
Expression is so right on. So, like, it's just like, how do you feel? What are you drawn to right now in terms of expression? And that's what we go with. I don't know. I'm at this point in my life and my career, Holly, where like, and I'm blessed for this, like labels and trying to classify things and being like, this is creative, this is not, I'm just like, what, what is calling to you? And how do we, if the garden is calling to you, let's get you in the garden, even if it's for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's get you in the garden because you're and the spark doesn't lie. You're either lit up or you're not about something. I mean, that's what's interesting is like many of us are pretending to be lit up about things we're not actually lit up. Now, with kids, sometimes like there's different, we have to kind of judge that a little bit. But part of the spark work is about radical honesty and kind of coming back to even more integrity with like what's actually a yes for you and what you've kind of been trying to convince yourself is a yes for you.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And getting to know the yes and no within your own barometer, your own
And the
body
yes
mind system.
changes. So like I just had kids, you're on this journey. We have to be like, who am I now? And
Hmm.
what might, what is my soul drawing, what am I kind of being drawn to now? I'm reading this, I'm being drawn to read this. Okay, like reading is just a part of it because it's not, yes, I'm not making something, but making something is only one part of the creative process. And I think that our culture teaches us right now the way we talk about creativity is building the thing, only building, building the thing and then getting famous, essentially. You have an idea, you build it, you get famous, repeat. And what that's not letting us do is kind of explore this part of creativity, which is like nourishing the soil before the plant grows. So the spark isn't about results, kind of reclaiming your spark, getting your spark back isn't like I wrote my novel. Now, if you need to write your novel, we probably need to like light you up a bit so that the process just becomes easier.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like if you have the spark, that connection, and you're feeding it every day, then everything becomes a little easier.
I would hope so, and I think I've seen that to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we have
That.
to be, especially as like parents, for anybody who's listening who's a parent, I had like all these ideas about how to be creative in your daily life. And then I became a parent and I was like, okay, I'm going to have to change some of my expectations. Like it's not an hour long, beautiful morning communion with the goddess that it used to be. It's like I give myself 15 minutes of writing. And for me, it's like flossing my teeth at this point. It's not writing my newsletter. It's not writing the book I'm working on. It's just like using writing as a way to like check in, come home, you know, feel something that's not related to all the people in my life, just kind of come into myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think I'll move. I wanted to say one thing because I wrote it down, and listening to some of your work and just knowing what you do, I just wanted to say, like, one of the things I really appreciate what your message is about, I think. but you tell me if I'm getting it wrong, is how we can start to put off some of the pressures and shames and some of those things that maybe even that critic voice would put on us as individuals and starting to open it to the more system. And you talk about this with imposter syndrome, for example. Instead of syndrome, it's an experience, and it's a collective experience. Like obviously there's a lot of people experiencing it. I feel this way with a lot of mental illness as well. Like that it's like, for example, so many women my age and a little younger being diagnosed ADHD. And then I just think about all the demands that are on women like this. And it's just like, this is a cultural, systematic thing where we're asked to do 10 million things and then we're labeled ADHD. um, yeah,
Blaming the cultural problem. I mean, that's a problem of the culture, and then blaming it on the individual.
yeah. And making the individual mind. And while I want people to be empowered with identity, and if it helps people feel empowered with that
Yes.
identity, please, please, please. And yet, it feels that way with imposter syndrome and so many syndromes that we put on the individual. And I feel like that's something that's really powerful about your work and your message. So thank you for putting that out in the world.
I'm so passionate about it. And you're so right that there's nuance because two things are true. If you listening to this right now, whoever is listening, if you listening to this are someone who might say, like, you have perfectionist tendencies in your life, okay, my hand is raised. Like, this is something I've worked with my whole life. Or if
Mhm.
you say you kind of suffer from like really plaguing imposter syndrome, what you're feeling is real. So when I say that like imposter syndrome is a disease, belongs to the culture, not you, it doesn't mean that what you're feeling isn't real. It's so real.
Yeah.
And it can be so debilitating. But one place I want us all to begin, which took me multiple decades to realize, is that it's not our fault.
Mm.
You're taught not to trust yourself. Imposter syndrome is all about not trusting yourself. We're taught not to trust ourselves. So, of course we're feeling this. And perfectionism stuff, we're taught that our worth, our performance equals our worth. I mean, the thing I talked about with my therapist, like it's not just me. Like we in
Yeah.
achievement culture, you are as good as the money you make, you're as good as the results you drive, you're as good as, whatever it is. So we're trying to like, I'm trying to invite us to sort of unbelong from that really pervasive cultural conditioning that wants to keep you from you. Now, just knowing that doesn't take away the pain of perfectionism and imposter syndrome, but sometimes it gives us just a little bit of space.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that it's not, look, we're doing the work. We are all doing the inner work. Like it's not like, okay, then I'm just washing my hands of the thing. We will work together to get you more and more free, but it's not you. This culture
Yeah.
doesn't want you to be creatively free. But,
Mm.
we're not going to listen to that.
Thank you so much, Liz. I'm going to pop into my quick fire questions, if that's okay. And just whatever word or two words kind of pop at you. And there's 9 questions. What makes your spirit expand?
Dancing,
And what makes your spirit contract?
obligation,
What is next on your bucket list? A place or an event or anything?
I'm writing my first book.
Ah, I can't wait. What do you collect that says the most about you?
Books,
Mm. And which emotion has been your biggest teacher?
anxiety,
What do you wish you could learn?
storytelling, really, really good storytelling.
What do you wish you could unlearn?
White supremacist patriarchy from every cell in my body.
If you could meet your soul before you were born, what would it whisper to you?
What came is you're here to have fun.
And if you could meet your future self 10 years from now, what would it thank you for?
Writing the book
I
and being
can't thank you.
relaxed about it. Yeah.
Oh, you're doing so awesome. I love your work. You know that. I'm a huge fan. I'm so, so grateful and excited for this audience to see you, know you, and you are incredibly inspiring. You have sparked me today. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks so much for having me on.